I think it's only in India that somebody would call a chancellor an expert. I go back home, even in my own area of expertise, my faculty think I know nothing. So, well, that's okay. But that's just the life of a chancellor in the US. Anyway, so I was asked to talk a little bit about reflections between, at least my biased thoughts of the differences between in the Indian system and the US system. And I think it's very difficult to have that conversation without bad-mouthing one or the other. So instead of focusing on that issue, I'm going to focus on UC San Diego, and in that context, bring out the differences between how, for example, UC San Diego, which is barely 50 years old, is one of the top 15 universities in the world. And the question is, and we talked about this yesterday, in India, when we were creating all of these universities right now, could any one of them be in that category in the next 50 years or so? And 50 years is not a very long time frame. 50 years is younger than I am, so it's not a very long time frame. Anyway, so the topic of this conference is actually very interesting and in some sense ironic, because exactly when we are here talking about the importance of liberal arts in the US, there is basically a disinvestment and a talk about or questioning the importance of liberal arts and social sciences in the whole academy. And this questioning is happening not by the faculty, not by the academics. It's mainly happening at the US Congress level, at the state and the federal government level. And it's happening in multiple contexts. One is directly asking the question. The other is cutting university budgets and squeezing and forcing the chancellors and the president's hands to make choices, which usually are bad choices. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about UC San Diego. UC San Diego is about 50 years old. It was born in 1960, when the first graduate class was admitted, and 1964 is when the first undergraduate class was admitted. So we started off as a graduate-only institution, and in that 50-year time frame, we are right now a university with $1 billion research portfolio, which is number 5 in the US. We are a university with 30,000 students, and we are part of the UC system, and the UC system has 10 campuses, and my colleague George Blumenthal, who actually is also in some sense a mentor of mine because I look up to him, is a senior chancellor. He's been around for a while, so I look up to him in learning the ropes of the UC system. So what have we done in these, let's see if I can do this. Okay, so in this short span of 50 years, actually before I go there, I want you to know where the campus is. So right in the middle out here, that building is called the Geisel Library. So Geisel is Ted Geisel, who's Dr. Seuss. So he donated the library, and we have the only collection in the world of Geisel's original works, and they are pretty amazing works. Right, and that ocean out there is not very far off. It's less than a kilometer away, and the chancellor's house is right on the ocean. No, I'm just kidding. It's a 1,200 acre campus, 30,000 students, 24,000 are undergraduates and 6,000 are graduates, and all of these. This ramp up has been over the last 20 years or so. If you look at our alumni base of 150,000, 75% of our alumni are less than 40 years old, are younger than 40 years. So they've all graduated mainly in the last 20 years or so. So what are we known for? Before I talk about that, we heard David talk about the Claremont colleges. If we had done what the original vision of UC San Diego was, we would be the second round of Claremont colleges. That's why we have these 6 colleges, where the idea was that every college would specialize in something or the other, and then all of these colleges would be based in this 1,200 acre campus. And the original plan was to have 12 colleges with about 2,000 students each. So it would be exactly the size of Pomona College, or very close to it. But it never happened that way, because it started off as a graduate-only institution, so there was a great deal of focus on research. And as soon as that happened, there was a lot of, as the colleges were being built, there was some infighting between who should control what, and everybody wanted to do everything, and there was no real control over college 1 would do this and college 2 would do that. So here we are, 6 colleges, and the way we look at it now is it's like the Oxford-Cambridge model, and each college has about 4,000 undergraduate students. And the graduate students don't belong to a college. So 4,000 is a large number, but it's still a small number compared to 24,000. And each college has its own gen ed program. And this is an important distinction because instead of having one single common core, we have 6 common cores. So your choice of picking one college over the other is based on what type of general education do you want. So before I talk about this general education, let me spend a few minutes on the notion of liberal education versus liberal arts education. I think it is fine to talk about liberal arts education, but fundamentally what you really want to talk about is a liberal education, whether it's in the arts, sciences, engineering, it really does not matter. And in my mind, what a liberal education implies is a curriculum, a set of courses that exercise the brain in different ways and develop different modes of thought. So if you're learning, for example, calculus, you learn to think one way. If you're now learning geometry, you learn to think a different way. If you're learning philosophy, you learn to think a different way. So when I think about building a curriculum, when I think about changing a curriculum, it is not the content that is as relevant to me as what is the thinking style that it is engendering in you. And one of the conversations that is missing in higher education is this notion of multiple thinking styles, and especially in the Indian context where the content dominates the conversation and the thinking style is basically overlooked and dismissed totally. And I bring this up because as you think about building a curriculum, you got to focus on this. So if you focus on this, and the US universities have done this really well, even though our conversation on thinking styles is not as is done as often as I would like to see it being done, but nonetheless it's embedded in our curricula. So that's why it's not a surprise that somebody who does art history at Pomona or music at UC San Diego ends up running a big business in India or China or Hong Kong, because regardless of what they picked as their major, they develop multiple thinking styles. And so that is really an important issue. Second important issue in my mind is in the US, when I think about building curricula, we think about problem solving. In India, we think about solving problems. Two very different things. Solving problem is like textbook type of solving a problem. Here's a problem, tell me what the answer is. Whereas problem solving is defining the problem. It is articulating the problem. It is gathering all the information you need to deal with the issue. It is working with others, and then it's solving the problem. And I think that is also a very important concept. And if you think about education that allows you to problem solve, and if you define problem solve the way I just did, then you are automatically forced to build multiple thinking styles into this. You cannot just think about, let's say in engineering, doing only mechanical engineering and thinking that you're going to be a specialist in that area. So that's the second big difference. The third big difference in India, and you can see this literally in the names of degrees, there is specialization implied on day one in the name of the degree. So, for example, and I could give you an example from my field, which is engineering. So when I was department head, then dean, and I was chancellor, I think degree names should be as broad as possible because the technology, especially in the technology area, they change. The technology changes so fast that you cannot keep on changing degree names. Now you go to the UK, which of course had a strong influence on education, higher education, on the whole world except the US. On the US it had a negative influence. So then we looked at that and we said, that's not what we're going to do. That's not the way to do it. So it's all very specialized. And you see the same in India, where electronics engineering is very different from electrical engineering, is very different from computer science, and these are all separate degree names. And I think it is fundamentally a mistake. So when you think about a liberal arts or a liberal type of education, and you try to then create a silo of a degree which is very special, very focused, you basically undid all the good stuff that you were doing. So even if your curriculum was kind of expanded or pretty broad, you have basically undone that. So in that sense, so let's just look at what UC San Diego, what do we try to do out here? So like I said, each college has its own education philosophy. So what you can do, a student coming in gets to pick a college and they get to pick a major. So you can pick any college and you can pick any major at UC San Diego. So the two, they're not dependent. Okay, so here are the 6 colleges: Roger Revelle, John Muir, Marshall, Earl Warren, Roosevelt, and 6th College. And naming of the college, probably not of interest to you, but it is where the chancellors have given up their careers because it is such a political problem, naming of a college. So right now I'm hoping that I don't have to name 6th College during my tenure. Okay, so Roger Revelle was the founder of UC San Diego. It's the oldest college. And here, the emphasis was, when they were building, when UC San Diego was starting, was emphasizing the need for both scientific and humanistic knowledge. And so the way this is defined is through this very unique humanities sequence that allows you to integrate history, philosophy, psychology, and a whole bunch of issues, and it's a 5-course sequence that is taught. Now, so that's a good part. The bad part about this is that if you're in some other college, you cannot take this sequence, or if you take this sequence, it's not counted towards your major. And I think that is one of those controls that the faculty members have created to kind of define their domain of influence and control. So one of my goals as chancellor is to, over the next 5 years, is to undo that and let anybody take this sequence, because even if you're not in this college, if this is of interest to you, you should be allowed to take it. So John Muir College has a 3-course sequence in social sciences and 3 in mathematics. And regardless of what major you pick, you would have to go take this sequence. So this goes back to the notion that Nick Hill was talking about yesterday, and which is, even in the U.S., is forgotten. When we think about liberal education in the U.S., we think about STEM, as in science and engineering, being forced to take or encouraged to take liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. But when we think about social sciences and humanities, we don't think about these young men or women having to take science and engineering, which maybe in the good old days was okay, but today is not. In this technological society, if you think about any problem, it is a multidisciplinary problem, and not understanding technology, not understanding science, is, you will not be as effective as you knew something about it. So just having the vocabulary to be able to talk and have a conversation with a scientist or an engineer is important for a social scientist, and vice versa. So, and I say this because yesterday in the course of the conversation, as these new colleges are being built, and probably rightly so for economic reasons, I was told that, oh, I'm not going to focus on this or that because it's too expensive to teach that. And I think at some point we have to ask ourselves, if this is truly an educational institution that is going to shape the 18-year-old to be a productive citizen of this great country, then should we be using the notion of economics as to whether what should be taught and what should not be taught? I mean, it's easy for me to say this, but I think at some point we need to think about this. And the reason, and this brings me to this notion of the big difference here is public and private universities in India are like East is the East and West is West, and the twain shall never meet. Public and private universities in the U.S. are totally integrated. They are seamless. So you will see somebody like me, after 30 years in a private university, becomes a chancellor of a public university. You will see chancellors of public universities support private, private support public, because we are part of the same ecosystem where we are serving different populations, different needs, and we are creating a diversity of capabilities in our university system to create a diverse population base that is going to be a diverse base of citizenry. That's not the case out here, and I think that is very unfortunate, and that's why some of these private universities end up either charging too high a tuition or creating management quotas. So for example, a private university in the U.S., most, not every, but many private universities in the U.S., actually just about everybody, is still subsidized, or not subsidized, supported by the U.S. government. So David is wondering, why is Pradeep saying this? I don't get any money from the U.S. government. Well, the U.S. government gives out Pell Grants. for low-income people to go to college. And these Pell Grants are loans, and they can take this loan and they can go wherever they want. And they go to, sometimes they go to private, sometimes they go to public. So in my mind, that's a notion of government support that does not exist out here. The U.S. government funds research at universities. That is a level of support because that allows us to expand our faculty. That allows us to manage the workload between research and teaching in a very good way. So, and allows us to do a lot of many interesting things. So that doesn't happen out here. So my foray in the Indian academia was like over the last 15 years, I tried to create like 2 different universities, and both of the times I was unsuccessful. One, so at the first time I had land, I had money, I had everything from the government. I just could not find the faculty. And the second time, we got stuck on an IP issue where the government's point was, hey, if I'm going to give you money, I'm going to control the IP, and I'm going to have representation on your board. And I think governance, Indian system hasn't figured out governance. There is a lack of trust. And the government's role should be to support and enable the university. The government's role should not be to control the academic enterprise. There is some level of independence that I think is both needed and important in the academic enterprise. Anyway, so I don't know how I digressed there, but nonetheless, back to John Muir College, so that's what that is. Thurgood Marshall also has dimensions of culture as a sequence. The Thurgood Marshall is one of our activist colleges. This is the college where students are thinking about social justice. They're thinking about human equality. You know, why is Africa not developing as much as the U.S. has, and what are the issues out there? So race, religion, ethnicity, you can go down the list, right? Warren College, it's about ethics and society. So it's not to say that every student should not have every one of these things, but what I'm trying to say is that every college has its own special twist on how it looks at life. And regardless of what the twist is, at the end of the 4 years, you have a holistically educated student whose mind has been trained in different forms of thinking and different styles of thinking, different styles of analysis and critical thinking. And here's Roosevelt College, and you can go to our website, and all of this is freely available out there. Making of the Modern World. This is actually one of the most interesting sequences. It's a 5-course sequence, but now it's a 4-course sequence. And the newest college is about culture, art, and technology. So let me say one more thing about, so I talked about UC San Diego being a billion-dollar a year research enterprise. So that's another big difference between the US and India. If I tell you the name Google, what does it remind you of? What does it mean to you, Google? Anybody want to, huh? A search engine? Right, yeah, that's the outside, that's the veneer outside, right? Google is an exemplar of federal government funded research with 2 PhD students who get out and get venture capital money, create a company, and now it is a $300 billion company, all based on federal government research. The federal government owns exactly 0 intellectual property. All of the intellectual property is owned by some combination of the company, the students, and the university, right? So economic development, the American university, American higher education has played a very significant role in its community, in the country, in terms of economic development. There is no university in the world outside the US that has created a Google. And I think that's fundamentally a problem. And I think for India, that is fundamentally an opportunity. So in the Indian government, the Indian system has to think about this and think about universities more than just educating the 18-year-old. With that said, thank you very much. Happy to answer a few. Yes, sir.
I'm sure my President Pericles Lewis would recognize the challenges in naming residential colleges that you're facing also, but I'm looking at the name Sixth College, which I'm sure is not named after Mr. or Ms. Sixth. Are you waiting perhaps for somebody to name the college after, and could you suggest other creative funding mechanisms that might work in India?
So it turns out that none of these colleges were named for money, not one. So the first college, Ravel, was the first college. then it was named Ravel. The second college was whatever, and then it was, right? So none of these were named after, named for money. Pardon me? I personally would love to, but my community of 30,000 students and 2,000 faculty would hang me by my toenails, because this is a serious issue, right? So for example, right now there's going to be a big debate as to should it be named after somebody of Mexican/Hispanic origin because of our location. So these colleges, they make a statement. The name makes a statement. Thurgood Marshall, one of the Supreme Court justices, that college made a statement because he was after equality and equal opportunity, and that's what that college is all about. So these college, the names make a statement.
But then could you suggest also something, is there a way that India could perhaps use the endowment funds to also increase it?
So look, I have to tell you a story. So the Indian chancellors, the vice chancellors and directors of IITs, they're into raising endowments, which is great, especially the IITs. I am on the advisory board of 2 IITs, and they're named, and 2 named centers of research. They have the money sitting in the bank. The donor is upset because the right things are not happening, and I'm the one who's the impedance match, who has to answer as to why it's not happening this way and tell the donor in the US why this is the right way to do it. I think the Indian system has not figured out what is it to collect an endowment, how to invest it, and how to invest it back into the system, and what is good stewardship. I mean, if you talk to any chancellor or any, I spend more of my time doing stewardship than I do raising money. The day I spend more time raising money, I'm making a mistake. So I have to spend more time doing stewardship than raising money. So now you see why I didn't want to compare India and the US, because it just goes downhill. I'm sorry, there was somebody out here. Go ahead.
Thank you. So since you raised the point about the IITs in the context of the Indian situation, so what I was wanted to ask was, you've talked about the problem of, the fact that there's too much specialization and not enough of emphasis on problem solving. But at the same time, the fact remains that, the IITs and also probably the Indian system in general, actually they've been doing very well in the US, which is also part of what the brain drain is all about, that actually they're doing in this so-called specialized system is actually leading to people who do very well in the US liberal arts environment or whatever. And so the question is that, but obviously it is not something which is conducive to them integrating into the Indian system, because we're not looking at the problems related to the Indian context that much. For instance, I went through IIT and I did loads of quantum mechanics and all that, which was really not very applicable at that time or whatever. So are you suggesting that we need to actually, of course now what the IITs are trying to do is they're trying to integrate more courses in humanities and for instance archaeological sciences, design and this and that, the other. But are you suggesting also there's a need to really look at, in a way, I won't say watering down the content, but how do you go to that process?
So I think, you actually answered yourself. The notion that if you don't take enough courses, you water down the content is erroneous. It is significantly erroneous. People say, so again, I pick my field, like to be an electrical engineer, you need to know electromagnetic theory. There might be something similar in physics and mathematics too. This is an erroneous notion. What you are trying to do is inculcate and engender different thinking styles, the ability to ask critical questions, the right questions, critically analyze the information, and keep on doing it, and keep on learning. You are not building a human being. I think Ram yesterday had a good quote from the founder of Delhi University as to what a university's role is, and I can't remember that quote. It basically said, you are not polishing the diamond out here. You're just trying to build the diamond, and let the diamond decide how it's going to be polished somewhere, something like that, right? And I think we need to go back to that, and we have lost track of the fact what the university was for. So the old Greeks, they understood, their liberal education was the ability to think, the ability to articulate, and the ability to grammar, speak, right? This was the liberal education, and these are exactly the issues that our kids don't have in college, because we are insisting more and more depth on issues that are irrelevant. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm being told, before she rings the bell, I'm going to be nice, because I'm really afraid of her bell. Go ahead, Lori, the last question, quick question.
This is such an inspiring talk on so many levels, and thank you. I think I want to pick up on this because I think this is kind of the core of some of the conversation between India and the United States. So the one thing I would say the downside, I mean, there are many downsides of the American educational system. One of the downsides that I have experienced is, I agree with you 1,000%, and you are a brilliant advocate of this question of learning how to critically think. And it's related to what I was saying yesterday about when people say I wasn't trained that way. I don't accept that, because if you can think that way, then read a book, right? So right. I completely agree with you. The one thing that I think we sometimes inadvertently communicate to our students is that they don't have to know stuff in order, because the critical thinking is so essential that they think that the mastery of knowledge, which is part of the critical thinking, is to be finessed in a certain way. And I worry about that. And in that way, I think the Indian educational system actually has it over us.
Right, and I think you should worry, because seeing my kids go through high school now, like a grade school and high school, you know, when I was young, tables like 2 times 2 is 4, and you know, I used to know like 20 times 20, like across the board instantaneously. My kids don't know that. Dad, we have a calculator, I don't need that. And I think that is lost. So there are certain things you got to know, you know, what the answer is, like right that. I agree with you. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you.